It's and I just have notes on it. That's yeah, we're gonna have I should pass them up, so another chat and also okay facilitating questions on okay that's great. Thank you. I've been on other committees where I have my headphones on, so. Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this week's BIOMES seminar. BIOMES is YSE's weekly research forum that brings together members of our community and Yale at large to engage with novel work and foster communication between environmental scientists, policymakers, and practitioners. Today's talk will focus on the drivers behind shifts in global energy production and demand and explore what our energy systems may look like in an increasingly uncertain future. I am honored to introduce today's speaker, Dr. Michael E. Weber, the Sid Richardson Chair in the Lyndon B. Johnson School of Public Affairs and the Cockrell Family Chair number 16 in Mechanical Engineering at the University of Texas at Austin. Dr. Weber is an energy researcher, educator, and author whose work involves complex energy systems analysis with specific investigations into grid reliability under extreme climate stress, clean hydrogen production and its integration into the energy economy, the built environment, and the food, energy, water, waste nexus. During his 2-decade tenure at UT Austin, Dr. Weber also served as Chief Technology Officer at ENGIE, a French multinational energy utility company, and at Energy Impact Partners, a clean tech venture fund managing over $5 billion in assets focused on deep decarbonization. With experience spanning both academia and the private sector, Dr. Weber offers a unique perspective on the energy transition, one in which innovation and commercialization within established energy systems can catalyze fundamental scientific and societal progress. I'm especially excited to introduce Dr. Weber today, as he is an influential voice who helps narrate the evolving story of energy systems for a global audience. Today, he will provide a broad overview of global energy trends grounded in both historical context and current observation. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Weber to the stage.
Please don't appreciate it. Great, thank you so much. Is this on fully? Are we good? Not on. See if we'll ramp it up. How about now? Can you hear me okay now? Okay, great. Nice to see you. So I'm just going to make remarks. I'm just going to talk, and then we can have some Q&A. That way we talk about what's on your mind. As you heard, I'm a professor at the University of Texas, and I'm going to share a couple different perspectives with you today. And I think the different angles I've had in my career reveal different insights. The Texas background is very important. I'm a born and raised Texas person. I'll talk about that in a minute. Lived in Paris for a while, so I was a multinational corporate executive at a large company called ENGIE. I like to say ENGIE is the world's largest energy company no one's ever heard of. I don't know if you've heard of ENGIE now, but I was there as their chief science technology officer, so I had 400 researchers around the world reporting to me, like a 200 million euro budget, looking at clean energy solutions in the future. So that perspective is part of what shapes me. And I was also CTO, as you heard, at Energy Impact Partners, a clean tech venture fund. So I've got this like venture capitalist view, this multinational corporate executive view. I've launched a couple of startups. So I've got the entrepreneurial view. But I'm mostly a professor, and a professor in engineering in the OBJ School of Public Affairs. So I'm an engineer who dabbles in policy. So I think about policy relevant problems. I think about policy audiences. And we use engineering methods to tackle some of those policy problems on energy and the environment and climate. So that's kind of who I am. But I want to talk about my background. Born and raised in Austin, Texas. There aren't that many people from Austin. There are a lot of people who live in Austin now because Austin's grown a lot, but there are very few of us that seem like you were born there. And I was born there because I was a faculty brat. My father's right here, was professor for 37 years at UT Austin. So that's Steve Weber, professor emeritus, who thank you for being here. Now retired from Texas, but he lives up here. Or like he lives up the road. Like, you got to come on down. So I was born on campus at UT. He was a professor of physical chemistry. In fact, he retired in 2005 and I started in 2006. So there's been a continuum of Professor Weber's since about 1967 or so, which is kind of funny. So we'll see if we can keep the trend going with the next generation. But I was born in Austin, and if you're in Austin, you tend to be environmentally inclined because Austin's an environmental city. But you also are connected to the energy industry because Texas produces so much oil and gas, among other things. So I've got this Texas perspective, which really shapes a lot of what I view, and then this multinational view and this entrepreneurial or venture view. It all comes together to what I perceive to be an energy transition now. And I know transition's a trigger word for all sorts of reasons. So we can't really talk about energy transition anymore. In fact, I've got a list of phrases you can't say anymore. We used to say energy revolution. That's no longer allowed. Energy evolution is no longer allowed. Energy transition is not allowed. But you can talk about energy innovation, energy abundance, energy expansion, energy addition, or now energy dominance. So those are the approved terms. But we think about energy transition or what is changing in the energy system. And there are a couple of things about that, the way I perceive it, which is change is actually the one constant of the energy industry. It's always changing. But there are episodes that are a decade or 2 decades long where you have faster change. And we tend to give those eras of change, a more rapid change, names like the Industrial Revolution or the Second Industrial Revolution or the Jet Age or the Silicon Age or something like that. And I feel like we're going through another one of those accelerated eras of change right now. In the way I see the energy transition, what this means to me is energy expansion in terms of access, expanding energy access, decarbonizing, and the third is operating in a warmer world. We have to expand energy access, decarbonize, and operate in a warmer world. And so if we think about energy access, if we just start there, there's still a billion people who don't have access to electricity or other modern fuels. There's still a couple billion people around the world who don't have access to piped water or sanitation, or a couple billion people who don't have access to mobility options or the internet. So we still have an access problem, and we have to improve that. We have to expand that energy access. And that shows up primarily as growth in demand for energy, water, and food, and minerals, and soil, and you name it. And that's a big part of the forcing function of the system. Well, just the population growth and the economic growth and everything else, the urbanization, industrialization, electrification, and motorization, all these things happening simultaneously, that is an upward pressure on the system to provide energy in a way that people need it for more uses. But at the same time, we have to clean up our act. The 7 billion of us who have access to energy to decarbonize and reduce emissions and land impacts and water impacts and everything else. And then we have to operate in a warmer world. And operating in a warmer world is a tricky one. So the Texas view on that historically is the heat waves in the summer. We design our entire system for heat waves in the summer. In effect, our heat waves are hotter and longer, and they start sooner. We used to think that summer wouldn't begin until like June, but now it's starting in early May. And the heat season goes through October at least, now sometimes early November. So we're having these longer, hotter summers that are also drier. That's a real problem. But we also have a less stable jet stream, so we get these polar vortices come down. So we also get a deeper deep freeze more often in Texas too, which is kind of bizarre. Like we're designing for the heat waves, but we have a milder winter on average, but a worse winter every once in a while for just a few days that we're not prepared for. The way you're prepared up here, like you put your power plants inside a building, you are winterized up here with your power plants. Our power plants, for the most part, are not winterized. And that kind of confounding problem of operating in a warmer world is something that Texas and Connecticut and everyone will have to deal with. And up here, it means this incredible snowstorms, everything else we had the last few weeks, but also means you have to prepare for rise in air conditioning demand in the summer, as you'll have hotter summers than you used to. You can't just assume a mild summer. So the operating in a warmer world is a part of it. The decarbonization is a part of it. But the expansion, let's talk about the expansion, because expansion will take different shapes in different places. In sub-Saharan Africa or Southeast Asia or Latin America, it'll be primarily growth in energy demand. In the United States, the expansion of energy access will primarily be growth in the power sector. We already have universal access to the United States, but we're going to shift what we're using for what. We're going to use different forms of energy. So we see incredible growth in the power sector in the United States. So let me back up and give some numbers, which is the power sector essentially grew for about a century. For about 100 years, it grew. For the last 20 or 25 years, it didn't grow. Demand was level, and now it's growing again, and we've forgotten how to grow. Like, we don't know how to grow the power sector anymore because we haven't had to grow like this in quite some time. In the last 20 or 25 years of level demand for electricity, about 4,000 billion kilowatt hours a year, every year for 20 years, and now we're growing 5 to 10% a year, depending on where you are in the nation. This is complicated to take a multi-trillion-dollar asset base or multi-trillion-dollar sector and grow at 5 or 10% a year. So that's what's happening right now. And most of the regulators and commissioners and planners and investors and engineers and development companies and EPC firms have cut their teeth in an industry that hasn't grown for 25 years. They weren't here the last time we had growth like this. It was just closest approximation is kind of the 1980s in terms of absolute growth, but the closest approximation actually the 1930s in terms of how the growth went from nothing one decade to a lot the next decade. So we haven't done this in a long time. We got to figure out how to do it. And that means we need permitting reform and just a lot of decision making. We have to move more quickly. And that growth is really going to be interesting in the United States compared to other parts of the world, because as we grow in electricity consumption for AI and electric vehicles, electric heating and cryptocurrencies and all these gigafactories and everything else that's going on, it's actually going to lead to reductions in total energy consumption in the United States. So we're entering this new era, and maybe we've been bumping along there for 20, 25 years, where energy consumption in the United States has been level for 20, 25 years, but actually total energy consumption might drop as our electricity consumption grows. Because as we start to use electric drivetrains for vehicles instead of gasoline engines, that will shave off a couple percent on national total energy consumption. As we start to replace gas furnaces with electric heat pumps, that will shave a couple percent off total national energy consumption. And we can do the same thing with cooktops and other things. So I actually foresee this transition happening where our total energy consumption will drop in the United States and might have been dropping for the last 25 years. Like depends how you measure, but it's been roughly 100 quads or 100 quadrillion BTU. A BTU is a British thermal unit, and a quad is a quadrillion. We've had 100 quadrillion British thermal units of energy consumption for about 20, 25 years, and it hasn't increased. So this is an incredible story that in the last 20 or 25 years, population has grown 20%. The economy has doubled or tripled in real or nominal terms, depending on how you measure, and our energy consumption hasn't grown. This is a phenomenal success. This is the unsung hero of energy, which is energy efficiency. And a lot of it's like light bulb standards. These lights are so much more efficient, but it's also appliance standards and fuel economy standards. We have a variety of things that have happened in the last 25 years where we've been able to substantially grow the economy and substantially grow the population without growing the energy consumption. And now we're in this future few decades where our population growth is slowing, and we're doing rapid technological substitution to consumer appliances like our cars and cooktops and heaters, as I said, and even replacing cars with Zoom and things like that. We are going to go to a place where our energy consumption drops despite population economic growth. This is pretty exciting, and no country has really done that in a substantial way, so we'll see how it goes. But this means a massive shift is underway. That's the transition that's happening right now. And so if you're an energy person, it's a pretty exciting time. We're like, okay, a lot's happening at once. Let's study it and write papers and talk to planners and policymakers and everybody else. The Texas view of this is kind of funny. Texas is weird, right? Texas, I love Texas. I'm a Texas patriot. I live there. I live in my childhood home of all things. So the house my dad built, I now live in because my wife and I bought it from him. And we live there. And Texas is a bizarre place. I can say proudly that we don't believe in the science of climate change. We have not accepted the science of climate change. There is no climate policy in Texas. In fact, there's policy dismissal that climate science is a Chinese communist hoax to make us poor. Like, this is the official Texas policy stance. Climate change isn't real, should not be considered. We see that with Secretary of Energy Wright, who's now at the Trump administration, said, like, net zero targets are stupid, climate is stupid. Like, why are we even talking about that? That view that the Trump administration shares with Texas is everywhere in Texas just about. Now, it's not unanimous, but it's sort of the prevailing political and policy position. And that's really kind of crazy because Texas does more for climate than just about any other place in the world. And it's hard to reconcile this. So let's put some numbers on it. Texas is a really big oil and gas producer. You probably no surprise. We're the number 4 refiner in the world, top 10 oil producer for sure. We are number 3 in the world for natural gas production, number 3 in the world. So it's United States, then Russia, then Texas, ahead of Iran, ahead of Qatar, ahead of Canada, ahead of Australia, you name your country. So Texas is really a dramatic oil and gas producer. We're number 6 in the world for CO2 emissions. We're pretty dirty. We're like South Korea or Germany or Canada in terms of the emissions. So decarbonizing Texas is like decarbonizing an entire country. But we're also number 4 in the world for wind generation, number 6 in the world for wind capacity. We're top 10 in the world for solar capacity. We overtook California. We're number 1 in the nation by far for installed utility scale solar capacity, not rooftop solar. We're number 1 in the world for carbon capture and sequestration, top 10 in the world for hydrogen. It's really weird, right? We're doing this without caring about climate. And so the question might be like, well, why do we do it if we don't care? And the answer is because we like to make money off our land and we like to have cheap stuff. And wind and solar and batteries are the cheap stuff. They are cleaner, cheaper, higher performing options if you're trying to expand the grid right now. So if you look at Texas as a growth trajectory for the power sector, our power sector is growing rapidly. We got Bitcoin miners and AI and a lot of oil and gas electrification. People forget how much electricity oil and gas use. And oil and gas is electrifying very rapidly to reduce emissions and improve productivity. And it's not just the extraction or the getting the oil and gas out of the ground. It's also the pipelines. It's also the liquefied natural gas refrigeration chains. Those are also electric. So oil and gas is causing demand growth of like 5 to 15 gigawatts of power. So the peak demand in Texas is 85 gigawatts, which is bigger than England, bigger than California. So we have a big grid in Texas. We have a standalone grid, which is kind of interesting and unique. 85 gigawatts right now. We see demand growth of 5 to 15 gigawatts of new load just for oil and gas. Plus, we see several gigawatts or tens of gigawatts of load growth just for population growth. And then for data centers, 10 to 50 gigawatts. It's hard to know what the numbers are for the data centers. So a lot of demand growth for electricity. And then That means we have to expand the grid, and we're expanding the grid 765 kilovolt high voltage transmission lines. We're building everything you can imagine except for coal and hydro. We don't have hydro. We don't really have water. We have a little tiny bit of hydro in Texas. Coal's not desirable in Texas for all sorts of reasons. So what are we building? We're building primarily solar and batteries and wind and gas, primarily kind of in that order. Solar and batteries dominate. Wind is a distant second, and natural gas is a distant third. Sometimes gas and wind will take turns because we built out most of the wind we'll probably build out. So if Texas is a preview of a future of a country or region that wants to expand electricity but doesn't care about climate change, what's it going to build? Really climate-friendly stuff, mostly wind, solar, batteries, a little bit of gas to back up the wind and solar. That's what's happening. That's what's been happening for the last 15 or 20 years. And as a consequence, we've been shutting down a lot of our coal plants in Texas. Those coal plants that were built in the 70s and 80s are kind of dirty and kind of inefficient. People don't really like them, and they use a lot of water. We argue about climate change, but we don't argue about water. Well, we argue about water, but we don't argue that water is important. Like, we agree water is important, and then we argue who gets it, and we don't like the coal plants getting it instead of, say, a farmer or a city or something like that. So it's kind of crazy that we have a very different set of criteria about what we care about, but we arrive at a set of climate solutions based on market forces alone. In fact, Texas puts up barriers to wind and solar and gives subsidies to gas. So we have multiple subsidies for gas, and gas still can't compete in the markets against wind and solar, which is kind of interesting. So there's some reason for optimism about the future of the power sector. And now we have the crazy times in DC with Trump, right? Trump really hates wind and solar, but a lot of the wind and solar decisions are local, so he can't really affect that, although offshore wind is a federal thing he can affect. So offshore wind gets hammered by Trump. Wind and solar get sand in the gears, but kind of limp along, so to speak. And he's really trying to open up nuclear as an option. And Governor Abbott in Texas is like, hey, we'd love some nuclear. So now we have a plan to install several more gigawatts of nuclear. So we might install nuclear. We don't have a lot of geothermal potential. We might do some geothermal, some wind and solar. This is it's just kind of funny. Like, we don't care, yet we're doing the right thing. And this is, for me, a cause of optimism, because it means that we can use market forces very cleverly to get a lot of really good results. And then electrification of transportation is not super popular in Texas, but the world's #1 electric car maker, Tesla, is headquartered in Austin. And so there's like kind of mixed politics there. Like, oh, we don't really like electric cars, says the Republican political apparatus in Texas, but we do like Elon, so maybe we'll give him a pass or whatever on this. And Elon says a lot of things about solar too. So solar and electric vehicles kind of are allowed to exist and doesn't get the full fire of resistance from Texas policymakers. So that Texas situation, I think, is very informative for us, because if we're gonna have to grow, we're gonna have to build very quickly. The other thing in Texas, we have pretty weak environmental laws. In particular, we have a weak ability to stop people from building stuff. So if you want to build a power plant, the environmental reviews in Texas are very limited. You can build a power plant, and usually that's to build wind and solar. If you want to build transmission lines, it's hard, but you can do it. We're building more transmission in Texas than just about anywhere. In the United States, it takes 12 to 20 years to build transmission lines. In Texas, it takes like 6. Now, okay, 6 is still too long, in my opinion. I think if we're going to meet the moment, we have to move more quickly. But that's exciting news, and part of that's just the way we're regulated as a grid that's contained wholly within the state, and we don't have different, sort of the same federal oversight. But there's something to be said there, like, if you can just build quickly, for the most part, the world will pick the right stuff. And this is hard to hear for people who care about doing things perfectly, because we're going to build wind, solar, and batteries, but some gas, and the gas makes some people very nervous. But we tend to build like 4% gas or 10% gas. The rest is really clean stuff. If you want the world to only build the perfect stuff, you end up not building anything. And so that's the contrast that we see in Texas, which is weird. And then now there's been some flip where politics might not care about climate change, but the companies do. ExxonMobil's been talking about climate change for years, maybe or maybe not this serious, but after Trump was elected in 2016, I want to say like the next day, ExxonMobil tweeted out, please don't leave the Paris Climate Accords. We think they're important. And then he left. They said that was bad. They said it publicly on the record. They said it's bad. And then when he left again, they're like, we shouldn't do that. So ExxonMobil, who most environmental groups wouldn't consider like the leading vanguard voice of climate change, has been pretty vocal about how we need to tackle climate change. The multinational oil and gas companies say, from their perspective, Trump might not care, Texas might not care, but customers in Europe do care. And these companies serve customers all over the world, so they have to worry about methane emissions in the supply chains, they have to worry about the cleanliness of their oil, they have to worry about climate change, carbon capture, all these kind of things. So they pay attention to it and they call for action. Darren Woods, the CEO of ExxonMobil, said on the record in 2022, in July 2022, and on the record, like an official statement from ExxonMobil, that he believes 100% of all light-duty vehicles sold in the world in 2040 will be electric. A man who sells gasoline for a living says his #1 customer, gasoline cars, will not exist for new sales in 2040 and beyond. That's a very important statement. He says, that's okay. Those electric cars, they need lightweight materials like plastics. We make plastics, we're good. So he's not the only one, but he said that. He was just on campus at the University of Texas a few months ago in September, and he gave a speech on the record where he says, look, we need more energy. We need to lower emissions. We have a moral, ethical, and business obligation to lower emissions. This is the CEO of ExxonMobil saying, we got to lower emissions. And so something has changed, I would say, in the industrial world where there's a view like, well, okay, the politics might or might not care, or might care in some states but in other states, or some countries and other countries, but the customers care, and we care. Because we can't hire employees if we have a company that doesn't have a sustainability statement. And we need to recruit the best and the brightest, and the best and brightest tend to want to go to companies that care about the environment. So something's changed, and that's sort of the front row seat in Texas, I will say. The other thing that's happening is we're building AI data centers. Like, I don't even know what to think about AI. And I've got all sorts of trepidation about AI, mostly for ethical and moral concerns. And there's this AI arms race, this race to win the AI race. And it's held up by all sorts of bottlenecks. There's the algorithms, the chips, the power transformers, the gas turbines, if you want that for power, or the gas pipe to give you the gas for the gas turbines. And we tend to focus a lot on the transmission, their interconnection, the utility hookup. The electric power tends to be the biggest, most visible bottleneck. And so there's a race for power, a speed to power issue for the AI arms race. And the AI arms race kind of reminds me of the nuclear arms race, where in the 40s, we declared and concluded we must win the nuclear arms race, but we never stopped to consider whether nuclear arms are actually good or bad. And it's the kind of same thing going on right now with AI. We're like, we know we must win, but we don't even know if AI is good. But we know we don't want the bad guys to have it without us. That's the same thing we said about nuclear weapons. So we must win the race, but when we're like, well, we'll figure out later how to make it good, which is kind of complicated for a variety of reasons, but that's where we are. And I've got all sorts of concerns about AI for disinformation, but there are a lot of use cases for AI, which is kind of interesting for the energy sector. You can accelerate the discovery of new materials, new chemistries for batteries. You can accelerate fusion reactor design. You can optimize your transformer life and how you operate the grid to extend the transformer life to overcome supply chain backlogs for the transformers. You have all these use cases around efficiency and predictive maintenance. Like, there's a lot of really cool energy use cases for AI. But in the near term, before those use cases come to be, it's going to exacerbate all our problems for energy and water. These data centers need a lot of power. They need a lot of water. And I'm thinking like energy, water, nexus. Reminds me of my book, Thirst for Power Road. I see Gene's here. So Gene, a longtime editor at Yale Press, who was my editor for the book, Thirst for Power on energy, water, nexus, something I've been thinking about for several decades. These data centers, it's hard to give you a sense of scale, but let me do what I can. So a computer rack is not quite as wide as this lectern. It's a little narrower than the lectern, but about my height. And traditionally, up until about 2 years ago, that computer rack, that server rack, was like 15 kilowatts. So 15 kilowatts is about the demand of a short, like a block of houses, 5 or 6 houses, say, unless it's summer in Texas. So one block of houses and one computer rack. This year, that same rack will be 200 to 450 kilowatts, sometimes as big as 600 kilowatts. Next year, in 2027, it will be a megawatt. It will have gone up by a factor of 60 or so from where the rack was 2 years ago to next year. So a megawatt per rack. A megawatt is the power consumption of an entire Walmart supercenter. So we're going to have a Walmart in one rack, and then a building like this filled with hundreds of racks. So these data centers will be hundreds of megawatts, which is just incredible. And then you have a complex of several buildings. It ends up being like a gigawatt or multiple gigawatts. The Stargate complex outside of Abilene, Texas, is supposed to be up to 5 gigawatts. A gigawatt is about a nuclear power plant, like 5 nuclear power plants of power in Abilene. Most of you probably have not been to Abilene. So let me put some numbers on. Austin is a city of about 1.25 million. Our peak demand is 3 gigawatts. Abilene is a tiny, tiny town compared to Austin. We're going to take an Austin and a half and put it at the end of the block in Abilene. So the incredible power density of demand in a small town or these other remote locations will have a distorting effect on the system, perhaps on rates, perhaps on grid stability. But there are different things. When that turns on, it's going to drive up demand. If it turns off, it could destabilize the grid as well. So we have this whole new world of demand for AI, plus the water for the cooling. By the way, all those racks I mentioned have been air-cooled, but by 2027, they'll be 100% water-cooled for the new ones. So think like water demand. Now, the water will be in closed loop. You don't need a lot of new water, but you have to have the water in the first place. So any of you inventing new ways to do cooling, you will have a very sort of rich future, I think, ahead of you. Because they have to figure out how to shed that heat. Because the electrons come in and they leave as photons and heat. And you got to do something with that heat, or else the chips lose their performance and things break. So we could also quit building them in Texas and build them in like Alberta or colder places, or Yale, perhaps, might be a better place. So there's this demand for power, which is going to strain the system. The way we're going to feel AI, and we're already feeling today, is a strain on the energy water system. But then someday it might be a benefit to the energy water system. And I bet that benefit comes within 2 to 5 years, but the strain we're feeling already for the next 2 years. So we have this mismatch of time of how AI strains the system versus how it reveals solutions that we can use to improve the system. And we got to sort that out. And it's going to make people very grumpy because it's going to put upward pressure on rates and it's going to compete with other uses. And this reminds me a little bit of hydraulic fracturing, which was really a combination of horizontal drilling, hydraulic fracturing, and the shale revolution that started in Texas, but now is happening all over the United States in different shale formations. When shale really took off, that was like 2007 or 8 to my eye. Shale went from like 0 in 2007 to $150 billion a year in 2019. So we went from 0 to over $150 billion a year of shale oil and gas production in just over a decade. It needed a lot of water. Hydraulic fracturing, the hydraulic means water. So it was so thirsty for the water for the hydraulic fracturing to fracture the shale. And this created a huge problem for these communities because you have this new user of water coming along and they can outbid everybody for the water. Just like AI data centers are coming to the community and they can outbid everybody for water and energy. So this makes people nervous, even in Texas, which is very oil and gas friendly. People are like, whoa, that's a lot of water. What are you going to do? And if you looked on average, shale needed like 1 or 2% of the water. It wasn't a big deal on average. But it's like 100% of the water in that community for the new water that's available. And that's the way AI is. AI is like 1 or 2% of the electricity overall. It's not that big a deal on average. But on that community, it's 100% of the next available kilowatt hour, next available electron. So we have this sort of mismatch in the localized effects versus the average effects and who benefits and who gets rates going up. And the politics are kind of interesting because you have Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick in Texas, who's ultra conservative, who says, I'm suspicious of AI, and I'm not sure that we should let them operate whenever they want because it makes the grid unstable. But he also doesn't want retirees and grandmothers making Microsoft richer. So this is what Dan Patrick says. Elizabeth Warren kind of says the same thing. So we have this sort of collaboration from far left and far right where they're both sort of concerned. And usually when you have this kind of bipartisan sentiment, that means something's going to happen. So we're going to start to see some constraints on AI. And there'll be a race. Some states will just ban it. Some states say we love it. In Texas, what we say is you can build it, but you must be flexible, which means at peak times you must dial back a little bit so you don't break the grid. And 2 years ago, the AI data center developers were like, we can't be flexible. We can't turn off for 15 minutes. It's too important. But now they're like, okay, then you can't hook up. They're like, okay, we can be flexible. So there's a new attitude by them where they're like, okay, we can be flexible. We can dial back for a few hours a day, for a few days a year at peak times because the grid actually has plenty of excess capacity most of the time. It's only a problem at the peak times. For us, that's peak winter heating or summer peak cooling. And that means they can dial back, maybe change the clocking speed of their algorithms to reduce demand or use batteries on site or on-site gas generators or solar panels. There are a variety of things they can do to reduce the demand on site, which is something to do. And now that's going to be the future, is this demand flexibility. And then all of a sudden you go from the problem being made worse by AI to actually they're part of the solution set. If we had a bunch of data centers that operate around the clock but dial back at peak hours, they will increase the total number of terawatt hours we consume. They increase the denominator of electricity we consume divided by the numerator of the assets we have. That should mean we're dividing the electric system by more kilowatt hours, should lower the rates for everybody. All right, if we do it the right way, it'll lower rates for everybody. If we do it the wrong way, AI will drive the rates up for everybody, so we might as well do it the right way. So there's this future you can imagine where AI makes everyone grumpy for a couple of years, but then a few years from now our rates go down. We're like, why did our rates go down? Because really rich companies put hundreds of billions of dollars into expanding the grid that we all got to benefit from, if they're willing to be flexible and be good neighbors. So that's something we'll have to tolerate. But that's kind of where we're headed. And I think that we see it in Texas with multiple gigawatts of data centers coming in. If you believe the full interconnection queue, it's like 200 gigawatts of data centers coming to Texas. We have a peak demand of 85 gigawatts. We won't get 200 gigawatts. The maybe ambitious, optimistic, the aggressive, realistic view is 50 gigawatts. We're probably going to get like 10 to 20 gigawatts. That's still a lot of power. I mean, that's like the power of New England going in just to one customer class of data centers in Texas. So I might stop there because I've already been talking too long, but there's a lot going on. Energy is changing. I tend to be a pretty optimistic person. Maybe that's because I live in Texas. We see even when you don't care, you tend to do the right thing. And so we might be in a moment of time where America doesn't care about climate change, yet we're mostly building the right solution, not perfectly so. And if we build a lot of nuclear, that'd be kind of cool, build a lot of geothermal and solar batteries. And if we shift from internal combustion engines for our cars to electricity and other things, we're going to get great outcomes from this. And then we can talk about reliability and other things that might be on your mind. So why don't I stop there because we're at the halfway point and take your questions so we talk about what's on your mind. And I'll repeat the questions so that people on Zoom can hear it. But really, oh, you got a microphone, so maybe I don't need to repeat the question. It's great. But thank you for having me. I know I can just talk for hours. So I guess that's part of the purview of being a professor. But I'll stop there, and I think we have a microphone for questions. Thank you very much. Any questions? I take questions, corrections, and insults. Looks like there's a question here on this side. Okay. I think it's right up here in the gray.
Uh, Thank you so much for your talk. Hi, I'm Kumaresh. I come from India. I'm a MEM student in my second year. You briefly mentioned in the start about sort of the global aspects of energy transition. I want to understand, given whatever is happening, do you see the United States play a role? Number one, do you see the United States play a role in sort of helping other countries improve energy access or build out their energy infrastructure? And number two, do you even think that sort of that's a good thing? That, I mean, do you think the US should get involved?
Great question. So maybe a couple parts to that. And I'll start with the answer, then I'm going to back up a little bit. In my view of the world, it is good for the United States to be a collaborative player on technology and policy and markets for the world. And so I think the world operates better when we're a good partner, an honest partner, and a serious partner. And we can do that in a variety of ways. I'd like to see us engage. I think it would be good for us and good for everybody else if we do that. So I think we should. I think we will, although that's in question right now. Like, we're actively retreating from the global stage, so we'll see where that ends up. But you mentioned you're from India, so I want to back up, because if we back up 20 years, the most interesting climate story in the world was America, and then it became China, but it's actually becoming India right now. So if we take the US perspective, the thing that I haven't mentioned yet is our CO2 emissions peaked 20 years ago. We don't have political consensus about the importance of climate change. We don't have comprehensive climate policy in the United States. We don't even agree it's a real thing. Yet our CO2 emissions have dropped about 15 or 20% in the last 20 years, primarily by shutting down coal plants and substituting natural gas, wind, and solar. And there are a variety of policy and market and other reasons why that's happened. But we've been reducing our emissions kind of accidentally. And so our emissions peaked in 2006. Our coal consumption peaked 2006. Those are correlated. Coal use is down 60%. Gasoline consumption peaked in the United States in 2018. It's been sliding for 8 years. There's no way gasoline consumption will come back in the United States. Like, it will continue to decline. And so our two biggest sources of emissions had been coal and gasoline, are dropping. Now it's natural gas, the biggest source of emissions for us. That will peak at some point and then drop as well. And so we became no longer the biggest problem. And then a few years later, China overtook us. And China's emissions have gone up dramatically, and Chinese coal use has gone up dramatically. Chinese emissions are flat or dropping for the last 18 months. Chinese CO2 emissions probably have peaked and are declining. Even though they're building new coal plants, they use those new coal plants at partial capacity. They only run like half the time. And they use those new coal plants to displace their 20-year-old coal plants that were half as efficient. And so Chinese coal consumption seems to be peaking, or have peaked right now. Chinese gasoline consumption looks like it peaked in 2023. So if you have the world's number one and number two coal and gasoline consumers having had peaked, is that even the right grammar? That means that we're declining. China is about to decline, or maybe start to decline, but India is ascendant. And India is also overtaking China on population. So the next most interesting country is like, okay, what happens with India? And then you can think of like the US-Indian relationship. How can we help India? One of the ways we've been helpful to the world is proliferating technologies. We developed the batteries. Now, we didn't manufacture the batteries, but the lithium-ion chemistry was developed by my colleague at UT, a man named John Goodenough. Okay, his name is John B. Goodenough, right? So what a great name. He just died a couple years ago. He is the oldest Nobel laureate in history. He got the Nobel Prize in 2019 at the age of 97, I believe. He was a faculty colleague in my building. We get like tacos together at lunch, and he's like, "Oh, I invented this thing, by the way." So he invented the lithium-ion battery that you have in your phones and everything else. He also invented, decades before that, RAM, random access memory. So the guy changed the world of computing with RAM, then changed the world with lithium-ion chemistry, which America, for the most part, didn't develop, but China did, or other countries. So we can play a technology leadership role if we so choose, and keep investing in R&D and innovation. That will lead to some benefits to other people. So that'll be part of it. We can export turbines. We can do all sorts of things. And I think the world's better if we are a technology leader on that. Right now, I feel like as a nation, we're questioning whether we want to be a technology leader anymore. Like, that's part of the debate in Washington, D.C. I think we should be a technology leader. And if we are a technology leader, we'll proliferate the solutions. So I think we should be and will be, but that's not guaranteed. Great question.
Great. Thank you for your talk. I appreciated your talking about Texas, and I want to ask a question about how you framed it. You were saying Texas is basically making huge changes for the climate through entirely a market-based approach. And I agree. Texas is building a huge amount of wind and solar and is retiring coal plants. So that's slowed a little bit in Texas recently. But I'm wondering whether I should see that as a market-based climate policy, or whether I see that as Texas benefiting from a lot of policies that other countries and other locations put in that kind of drove down the cost of some of those technologies. And then Texas is pretty good at picking up on the market and diving in and making it easy to build so that they can build wind and solar. So should I think about it as a Texas market-based policy, or should I think it as Texas just follows the market wherever it takes it?
I mean, so Texas is a leader and a follower, but there's more following going on in Texas quite often than leading. We tend to not be the first adopter of a lot of technologies, but we are great at scaling up. So the technology is probably invented somewhere else, but then it comes to Texas to scale up. Tesla is a great example. Tesla was launched in California for a reason, but moved to Texas for a reason, which is to scale up. And that happens quite often. So this is an issue. I teach energy entrepreneurship for graduate students at Texas. And there's a class like it called Climate Ventures at Stanford and one at MIT. The MIT and Stanford schools, their energy entrepreneurship programs tend to create more high quality startups than Texas does, University of Texas. But when those startups need to scale up, they move to Houston, which is, it's kind of a fact. We're like the China of America. We're the big, dirty, rule-free manufacturer that you go to when you need to drive down costs and drive up production. And so this has primarily been our role. Now we have led on carbon capture and sequestration, on hydraulic fracturing. There are a few things where we were the world leader on it. We're still the world leader. But a lot of us, like we're not even a fast follower, but we're a really large scale follower. And there's a role for that. So we let Germany buy down the price of solar panels. Then when the price was right, we're like, okay, we'll do that. We also had some international buyers of our RECs, or renewable energy credits, early on. So we had international market participants. But you can't explain the full size of the market from all the RECs or all these different things. But those were good kickstarts for it. We also, for a while, had really good bipartisan agreements. So our renewable portfolio standards, our RPS, were passed in 1999. Texas had the first renewable portfolio standards in America, ahead of Connecticut, ahead of California. You name your liberal state. We had renewable portfolio standards signed into law in 1999 with then Governor Bush. It was not that hard. Republicans wanted market deregulation. Democrats wanted renewable standards. They're like, let's compromise. Let's just do both. That's the way politics used to work in Texas. It's the way it used to work in DC, frankly. And so we passed a law in 1999 to kickstart the market. It took off, and then now we don't even need laws anymore. So we had some good policy, some international buyers, some international innovation, but a lot of scale up following the market. But we have some homegrown innovation as well. I don't want to dismiss our ability to be innovative, but it's just like I think in the end, we have a lot of land that's windy and sunny and flat and cheap. And we have population and economic growth. It's a lot easier to build wind and solar if you're in a growing system. It's much harder for Connecticut, where your population's been much more level. Or Indiana, and you don't have the same sunshine in Connecticut. You don't have the same space. Indiana has, say, no population or economic growth, so it's going to be harder for them. But if you have a growth scenario, you got to build something. Then wind and solar and batteries become part of the mix of where you have to grow. It's a lot harder if you have to shut down something else to make room for it. But we could accommodate growth without shutting other things down. Now, those new things we built outcompeted coal, and we've been shutting down coal. So it used to be coal was number one in the fuel mix in Texas for power, followed by gas, then nuclear. Coal is now behind gas, wind, and solar and nuclear. So wind and solar went from like 0 to second to third place in the fuel mix in the power sector. So a lot of that can be attributed to some of the early buyers and early policies, but I think it's just like the resource is good. Like wind is so abundant and cheap in Texas, and solar is so abundant and cheap, and you've got customers, so you might as well build it. But in a state without great wind, without great sunshine, without a lot of flat, cheap land, without growth, it's going to be a lot harder. So it's a mix of all those combinations. Great question.
As a fellow Texan, love hearing the perspective of what's happening there. I'm curious with the amount of data center demand growth that's happening in Texas and a lot of mega sites like Stargate outside of Abilene. Are you seeing shifting trends with regards to natural gas powering these facilities? And do you expect, as more demand comes from data centers, it to be powered primarily by natural gas going forward?
This is a great question. So the data centers are in a race for power, and they say, we'll put billions of dollars or hundreds of billions into these data centers. Can we get power? And the utility says, yeah, no problem. We'll hook you up in 4, 5, 7 years. Even in Texas, which moves quickly, it still takes years to get a utility hookup. And they say, okay, well, then I guess we'll install a gas system at our data center while we're waiting. They'd much rather have grid power. They would all prefer grid power, but they also can't wait 5 or 7 years. So their goal is, well, we'll install something today, which is gas reciprocating engines or gas turbines or natural gas combined cycle. generally while we're waiting as a bridging power, like to bridge until they get the utility connection. So that's becoming more common. If you haven't already placed your turbine order in 2024 or earlier, you're not getting a turbine probably till 2030 or something. If you have placed your gas turbine order, and GE said this, like their backlog is going back here. You can pay more money to go sooner in the supply position in the queue, but GE, Siemens, ABB, you name your gas turbine manufacturer, like they're all like having a great time. They're like, we got multi-year backlogs. If you had placed your gas turbine order, but had not ordered your transformers, you won't have your power electronics. And you have to have ordered your gas pipe if you don't already have a gas pipeline. And the gas pipelines can take longer than the gas turbines. So we kind of like have all these backlogs happening at once. So I think they will go gas for a variety of reasons. And some of them had, frankly, some of them saw this coming and they placed their turbine orders in 2022 to 2024. There are three different types of gas systems. And I know I'm probably saying a bunch of things you already know, but there's the gas combined cycle systems, the gas turbine peakers, and then the reciprocating engines. Reciprocating engines are the smallest but fastest to get deployed. They're also the dirtiest and the noisiest and least efficient and most expensive, blah, blah, blah. But people are going with that. And there's a lot of these gas reciprocating engines that oil and gas industry owns that they're not using now because drilling's down like 10% nationwide. So oil and gas is repurposing gas reciprocating engines to sell to data centers. Then you have your peaking turbines, which don't like to be run 24/7 for 5 years in a row, but you can. And so for the most part, they want natural gas combined cycle. The only customers for natural gas combined cycle right now are basically data centers. There's a lot of customers for them, but just data center. Like there's a lot of demand from the data centers. The bulk grid wants wind and solar and batteries and gas peakers. You can't get a natural gas combined cycle built in Texas or other markets right now because the natural gas combined cycle power plant might only run 40% of the time, if that, and the economics don't work out. But a gas peaker, where you can ramp it up and down really quickly, might run 5 or 10% of the time, will pay for itself. So the grid is calling for gas peakers. Data centers are calling for gas reciprocating engines or combined cycle. They can get the recips quickly. Combined cycle will take several years. And they will do that. And then the minute they get grid connection, they'll dial down their combined cycle because it's too expensive. They'd much rather get grid-tied electricity. So yeah, the demand for gas will be high. Those same data center companies, they're the 4 hyperscalers, the Meta and Google and Amazon and Microsoft. They all have sustainability plans and they really want clean gas. So they're putting pressure on the gas companies to reduce their methane emissions in the supply chain. They're looking at carbon capture. They're also putting big money into nuclear and geothermal because they're a little uncomfortable about using that much gas, partly because of the emissions profile, but partly because of the price volatility and supply risks. In Texas, when it gets cold out, the gas supply freezes. We lose 10 to 85% of the gas, depending on where you are. So gas is not a perfect solution for them, but there are some speed benefits of it. This makes environmentalists very nervous because this is additive emissions. So if you have a new natural gas combined cycle power plant providing electricity for your electric car to turn off your gasoline engine, that is an emissions benefit. If you're using new natural gas combined cycle power plant to make electricity for your electric heat pump to turn off a gas or fuel oil furnace, that has an emissions benefit. A natural gas combined cycle power plant for a new data center, it's all new emissions. Like there's no substitution that's happening somewhere, unless maybe you get some efficiency play out of it. So this makes people very nervous, and it makes the hyperscalers nervous because they've been making these zero carbon pledges for years, and they're like, okay, well, we're willing to delay our pledge for a few years because we think we're about to make $1 trillion, like that. So yes, the demand is high. In the long run, it's not that big a deal. So I tend to think like, okay, there might be 80 gigawatts of new natural gas combined cycle in America out of 1,000 gigawatts. Okay, that's not a huge problem, but we're going to shut down coal. Okay, I'll take that trade-off. That's kind of where I am on this. But the demand for gas is real. It's also just in the last 3 years. That's not what they were talking about in 2019, for example. But they are putting money into nuclear. It's not like bringing back 3 Mile Island. It's not like they can't get gas fast enough. So if they can turn 3 Mile Island back on, they're like, okay, we'll take that as well. I think they're just trying to buy everything they can get except for coal. Great question.
Thank you for your talk. Not being from Texas.
It's okay.
There are a few of us.
Yeah.
I must admit I'm reacting a little negatively to your total positive. Texas is great.
My optimism offends a lot of people. It's fine. That's no problem. Yeah.
So these questions are not meant to be too argumentative. The first one is, you talked, well, it's a sort of a series. You talked about Tesla moving. Tesla arguably was the instigator of the electric car, the electricity thing. That happened under a policy that gave huge amounts of tax credits to not only Tesla and in California. but also nationwide to other countries. So there was a policy that led to Tesla, and now Tesla's moved to Texas. So one of my questions is, what about, how do you as an expert, but how does Texas generally see policy at the broader national? Because here Texas is benefiting, I'm arguing, I could be wrong very much, from a policy that was done outside of Texas that really promoted Tesla. And similarly,
You're right, by the way. I'll come back to it.
Yeah,
You're spot on.
you started with your talk about how the summers are getting warmer and the winters are milder, but you're getting sort of this polar vortex problem. And I'm wondering, in Texas, where you talked about not being allowed to talk about certain words, where do Texans see that? And do they believe that there's the need for a national or international policy to deal with that? Or they believe, as you suggested, that all Texas, I'm putting words in your mouth, so correct me, that all Texas, that all the country, the world should go like Texas and become sort of, not to mention the dirty climate word, should be free of that and just go ahead with sort of whatever's going to be best for the energy producers. I'm not being too clear, but
No, but your
I want you
question
to
makes a lot of
sort of
sense. So-
look at those things.
And this kind of goes back to what we heard earlier. So with the question, Ken, that for the Texas isn't super thoughtful on a lot of these policies, but is able to benefit from thoughtful policies implemented elsewhere, which could be Washington, D.C. or Brussels, or sustainability programs like corporate buyers who want to buy these renewable electricity credits. So Texas lazily or unthoughtfully, I think it's a fair way to say it, benefits from other people making these decisions, primarily because we have the resource. If you want sunshine, well, we've got sunshine, right? So does Arizona, Nevada, but a lot of northern Germany doesn't have the sunshine. So we benefit from other people being first movers on the policy or in the innovation quite often. So this is true. Like we are a follower on the policy as well as on the scale up. So we're not super thoughtful about the policy that way, although we do have some policy strength. Our primary policy strength is around permitting. And so a lot of the permitting reform in DC is basically act more like Texas. So if there's one policy strength where we've been a leader, is that we can get things built. And I think we're at a moment in time where we need to get things built. The environmental movement spent 40 years developing the ability to stop bad projects, but along the process also stops good projects. The Texas permitting free nature allows bad projects. It also allows good projects. But generally speaking, if you have the ability to build things, you'll build more good stuff than bad stuff for a variety of reasons. And so in that place, I think Texas is a policy leader. But on everything else, we're probably like a policy follower. But RPS, we were a policy leader to the Renewable Portfolio Standard. So there are a few instances where we've been a leader, but for the most part, we've been a lazy follower, and we benefited absolutely. So take the Tesla example. It was federal support for Tesla, California support for Tesla, and then federal support for the buyers of Teslas. Like there was 3 major supports. Federal support for the buyers is gone. Federal support for the car companies is gone. California support was kind of getting tapped out. And I think Elon moved Tesla partly for that reason, but also he'd already dominated the California market. What's the number 2 car market in America? Texas. So he comes to Texas. Will he move to Florida in 10 years because Florida's the number 3 car market? Probably. I mean, it looks to me like it's just a business move that he had to come to Texas because Texas doesn't have the support for EVs, and he's having to work a little harder to get the adoption in Texas for a variety of reasons. So I think that is fair. So my optimism, I am very optimistic. But my optimism isn't just that everyone should be like Texas, more like, hey, even in a place that doesn't care, you still kind of make your way to the right answer. That should give us some sense of relief. Like, okay, even if we have headwinds in DC or wherever, I think we're going to move towards the mark. Now, we might move too slow. I'm a fan of smart policy and good policy. I'd rather us move faster. And I think we could move faster. If your market forces alone, you get to the right answer, but it takes 20 years longer or something. So smart policy would help us move faster. But it's more like, what lessons can we learn from Texas? Not like we should all be like Texas all the time. I mean, Texas, it is funny. We have our problems, right? We had our winter storm Uri 5 years ago. The power went out. Hundreds of people died. Like clearly, we prioritize cheap energy over reliable energy. Like that is clear in Texas. And we have a lot of other policy problems with high maternal mortality and high incidence of sort of death and dismemberment on work site. Like, so there are a lot of things where you're like, yeah, well, let's not follow that example for Texas. But on the energy climate space, there's some interesting things. The other part is, this is much more controversial, generally speaking, but we export a lot of gas to Europe to help Europe get out from under the thumb of Vladimir Putin. That's good for the world, I think. We export a lot of gas to countries that might use coal otherwise. I think that's good for the world. Now, that means we need to clean up our gas supply chains because our gas in West Texas is super sloppy. Like we have a lot of venting and flaring. So the world should not follow us on venting and flaring policies. But using gas to displace coal, okay, maybe they should follow us on that. So it's a mixed story. And I think you're right to call me out on that. I shouldn't gloss over it too much. But I think it's mostly we're benefiting from these other decisions made elsewhere. And we have the resource. And we have one really good set of policies, which is you can build stuff. Great question.
This will be our last question.
Okay.
So talking about some of the bottlenecks, speed to power, then you have your obvious like supply chain bottlenecks and permitting bottlenecks. And in order to get things actually built, you need people. And so something I think about is workforce development and the bottleneck of electricians, especially like at the high utility scale level. And that's another bottleneck, that takes like 4 to 5 years. And I think Texas will be, if they're building first, they're going to see this issue first and have to confront it and develop things now in order, you can't become an electrician overnight. It takes 4 to 5 years. How do you see Texas developing their workforce? Do you see that being a conversation at all in Texas?
It's a huge question. So let's take the advanced workforce of nuclear. We have a nuclear workforce development legislation. Like we have policies in place for that right now, which is great for the 2030s. It doesn't solve our current problem. I wrote an op-ed in the Houston Chronicle at the end of the year in December, reviewing Trump's first year in energy policies, like the good, bad, and ugly. And the way I summarize is the good stuff he did on energy was around nuclear and geothermal. So if you're a nuclear or geothermal person, you're very happy right now. His bad stuff, his policies are very bad for oil and gas. They're very bad for wind and solar. They're disastrously bad for offshore wind. And so I'm like, okay, if you're nuclear and geothermal, you're happy. If you're oil and gas, you're mostly pissed. If you're wind and solar, you're really pissed. If you're offshore wind, you're basically not allowed to exist anymore. But then there's a whole set of non-energy policies that are really bad for energy. Global trade wars are bad for the energy sector because it's globally traded commodities. We get steel from around the world. We get special parts, all sorts of things. So the trade wars are horrible, and just economic headwinds in general are horrible for energy. But also a lot of the immigration and mass deportation policies are horrendous for the workforce. And Texas feels that very badly. So we have a lot of workforce from around the world, the highly skilled labor. I think Houston has more languages spoken than any other city in America by far, and is a very international city, really hampered by like the H-1B visa problems. And then we also have some of the other development workforce, which might be immigrants or children of immigrants, other things, who are afraid to show up to work or have been deported or are in jail. Like it's just like, it's really bad. And so Texas feels this, but I would say that and Texas is kind of voting against Trump on this, which is kind of fascinating. So I don't know if you watch politics very closely in Texas, but a lot of seats are flipping in Texas. We had a special election for a state Senate seat just 2 weeks ago in Tarrant County. Tarrant County is Fort Worth. It's the largest Republican county in Texas. And the Democrat unseated an incumbent Republican, and it was like a 40-point overperformance or something like that because people are pissed about a lot of the workforce policies. And it's like these mass sweeps where you just kind of sort of masked people in unmarked vans grabbing people off the streets. And like this isn't very popular. And well, it's not popular with most Texans. And it shows up in the workforce where it's actually physically hampering the ability to get things built. And that's going to be true everywhere that's trying to build anything. Is we need people to design it, and people to build it, people to finance it and invest it. And if we don't have the people because we have stupid labor policies or immigration policies, that's going to be a problem. That's a huge problem for the energy industry because it is labor intensive. Maybe AI and robotics will solve some of that, but I would like to solve the ethical and moral qualms of that in addition to just the technological problems. So labor workforce is a huge issue. Governor Abbott doesn't like to criticize Trump too much because they're in the same party. So he talks about nuclear workforce development and kind of says, hey, can you dial it back on ICE? Because ICE is really a problem for us. By the way, ICE means Intercontinental Exchange in the gas world. It's a place where you trade natural gas, or it means internal combustion engine. So now we have like 3 meanings for ICE. So we have to think that. So yeah, labor is a huge constraint as well. And maybe we can get some automation will help. I mean, we already have some drones that help string wires and different things for transmission lines, but you still need people in the end. Huge problem.
Well, for anyone who wants to continue the conversation with Dr. Weber, please join us in Croon 238. We have some of his books also to give away, so I'll encourage you to come with that. But please join me in thanking Dr. Weber for his time today.
Thank you very much.